So I'm going to start, the presentation will basically have three parts. The first part would look at the contemporary situation on the issue in India and right now. Then the second part would go into would basically be a historical trajectory of how the discourse on tribal education has emerged in the country since independence. And the third bit would be about discussing the whole spectrum of schools that which exist in tribal areas, ranging from big privatized residential boarding schools to small culturally sensitive alternative schools in tribal areas. And in between those two ends is the whole, what the government is doing. So these are some of the glaring and very obvious issues which the media has started to write about and which are coming out. Include, there's a major issue of absentia of teachers in schools in tribal areas. The infrastructure is very poor, which is a widespread problem in general, not only specific to tribal areas. The day schools, this is a new development which has taken place in the last couple of years, that the day schools are being closed down, and there is a move towards opening up more and more residential schools. And one of the main reasons why the day schools are being closed down is because of the Maoist conflict in these areas, where schools have been used as spaces which are empty to be occupied both by the Maoists as well as the security forces to camp in. And it's taken for granted that the school can stop because of the Maoist conflict going on there. Then there are massive cases of sexual abuse and abuse of all kinds in these residential schools, which has been happening over years in the government schools, but is coming out more and more. Now, this is a recent report from January where the National Human Rights Commission has asked the Maharashtra government to explain the high number of deaths and cases of sexual abuse in residential schools. This is another slide which basically shows figures of how 882 tribal children died in state-run residential schools across the country. And so these reports have really are coming out in a big way in the last, they have started coming out in a big way in the last 1 or 2 years. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so one issue, as I said, one very obvious and known issue is of school buildings being used by the Maoist forces and the security forces as camps, and schools becoming dysfunctional as a result of that. Second is the Hindutvaization of education, where schools are being, by RSS, which is a Hindu nationalist group, schools are being run by them, and not taking any account of tribals having their own religion or their own life world, and basically seeing them as backward Hindus, and running a Hinduization sort of a program. And I'll go into it later. I'm just here highlighting the main issues, but I'll go into the roots of these issues in the history part of the talk. Then the other big move is of sending children to boarding schools. As I was saying, that as a result of closing down of village day schools, boarding schools are being set up. And recently, 2 years back, there was an article by somebody called, what's his name, in the Planning Commission, Vivek Devaroy, in the Planning Commission, who wrote an article saying that we need to have boarding schools as a policy across the country in tribal areas. So there is a move towards that, and there are a lot of similarities to the stolen generation policy in America and Australia in the past, but it's something which is not talked about. Now, speaking about, so my MPhil dissertation basically studied the policies on tribes and policies on education since independence to map the discourse on tribal education. and see what the tribal policy of the government was and how that influenced the tribal education policy of the government. So there have been two major schools of thought which have existed. The approach towards tribal areas has been twinfold. One is the extreme isolationist approach and the other is the assimilationist approach. The isolationist approach has been of leaving the tribal people in their land on their own to figure out, for them to determine their course of life. And the assimilationist approach has been of bringing them into the mainstream, assuming that they lie at the bottom of the ladder of social evolution and they are backward people who need to be uplifted and savages who need to be civilized. But the Indian government at the time of independence decided to choose a middle path of integration. So all the policies since then ostensibly speak of integration, which means bringing them into the mainstream but keeping their own culture and life world alive. This has been the policy on paper, but in practice it has basically been assimilation, which the most recent Khaka Committee report of 2014. Virginius Khaka is an eminent sociologist in India, and he's a tribal himself and has written on tribal affairs for years now. He was the chair of a government committee in 2014, and that report for the first time clearly says that India has basically followed an assimilationist policy all these years in the name of integration. If we now go into the history of the whole issue, the first tribal schools were started by missionaries in the colonial time in 1850s, and the whole idea was to civilize them, and they were seen as wild, savage tribes who needed to be civilized. This carried on for many years, and then in 1920s, Gandhi himself did not work with the tribal people, but he delegated somebody called Thakkar Bapa, who was a social worker, to go and work in tribal areas. And he was in a sense who tried to take the Gandhian values of education to tribal areas, but ended up doing something completely different. Gandhi's scheme of education, his system of education, which he clearly wrote down in 1937 with a very detailed program of pedagogy and curriculum, essentially said that work should be at the center of the curriculum. All learning should happen through productive work. So the teaching of subjects, of all subjects, science, math, language, history, whatever else, should happen through productive work, and there should be a unity of hand, mind and heart, and children should be, there was a lot of emphasis on working with your hands. And this was Gandhi's way of, in a sense, critiquing the colonial system of education, which had emphasized a lot on the value of literacy and the value of mental labor, and putting mental labor over manual labor. So Gandhi was, in a sense, critiquing the colonial system of education, and also within India, the dominant castes who were the only social group which had access to literary education. So Gandhi was, in a sense, responding to these two practices. And but Thakkar Baba and Gandhi's, apart from work being at the center of the curriculum, his other focus was on mother tongue being used as a medium of instruction. And that was again a whole critique of the English system of education. And Thakkar Baba went to tribal areas, he lived there, he set up schools and dispensaries, and he had a social worker's approach of serving the community. But he went with preconceived notions of what a tribal community is. He completely did not follow, he absolutely did not follow the whole idea of using mother tongue as a medium of instruction in schools. He used the regional languages of the area to teach and not the tribal languages, and saw them as mere dialects which are not of any value. And and had preconceived notions about what a tribal community is, so seeing them as backward, lazy, illiterate, addicted to drink and promiscuity. So he gave a speech in 1941 at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. And in that speech, which I did, if you do a discourse analysis of that speech, one sees that these are the connotations that he had of the tribal community, and hence he worked there with the purpose of uplifting them and getting them out of their poor state. And at the time Thakkar Baba was working there was a debate raging between Ghurye and Warrior Elwin. And so going back to what I was saying about the isolation-assimilation binary, Ghurye represented the assimilation end of the binary and Elwin represented the isolation end of the binary. Because Elwin believed in tribal people developing according to their own genius and believing and saying that tribal people are the most democratic people on earth and we need to learn a lot from them, as opposed to Ghurye who spoke of tribals as basically backward Hindus and who needed to be helped to come forward. This is, I think Felix will talk about this, we'll come to this later. This is a quote by somebody called Linda Smith, who's written a very inspiring book called Decolonizing Methodologies. So this is what Thakkar Baba was doing, and so Thakkar Baba and Elwin were both working in tribal areas in about 1920s and 30s, and working in reaction to the work of missionaries there. And post-independence residential schools, which Thakkar Baba had started setting up in these tribal areas, became the government policy. And we see that in the policy of the government in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to 2014, when Khaka Committee report, which I mentioned earlier, said that the government's policy on tribal education has been one of ashramization. And ashram schools meaning boarding schools. And that needs to be looked into. So Elwin, Warrior Elwin, he was a chairman of a committee in 1960, and he was somebody who spent a lot of time in tribal areas. He was married to a woman who was an Adivasi herself, and he spent years of his life just being there, learning from society and writing about them. And later on, he was appointed as the tribal advisor to the Indian government, to the first Indian government, when Nehru was the Prime Minister, and asked to write up the tribal policy. And Elwin said, there's a quote by him, Elwin said that the most characteristic systems of natural tribal education are actually destroyed by our education programs, which in fact would succeed better if they would regard the old institutions as allies and not as rivals, and would work through them. At present, the indigenous institutions are being slowly killed by the development programs, and we feel that this is not healthy, and much greater effort should be made to reverse the process. So Elwin was the advisor to Nehru's government, and he was really pushing for not completely erasing the systems of education, the institutions of education which had existed in tribal areas, but a sort of real integration between the schools and systems like Gotuls and Thumkuriyas, which had existed in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, etc. So he was really speaking of real integration, but at the same time, Nehru, being the Prime Minister, had a clear plan of industrialization for the country, and really believed in the power of science and technology for the country to move forward. So even though again in words, he had Elwin as the advisor who wrote the right words, saying that tribal people should develop according to their own genius, there should not be interference of non-tribals in administration in tribal areas. But in practice, dams, mining, all sorts of development projects were in full force in the decades of 60s. And then following the Elman Committee report was the Dheber Committee report, and which again said on paper that we should try and that children should speak in should be taught in their own languages. We should adapt the classrooms in a way that children feel that they are at home, so they should have symbols of their culture, etc. The textbooks should be in their own languages, and spoke highly of Gandhi's system of basic education, but never really followed what the essence of Gandhi's system of education was, which was work at the center of the curriculum. Then this was followed by the Dheber Committee report, and the Dheber Committee report came out in 1961, and this was followed by the first Education Commission report, the Kothari Commission report of 1964, which did the biggest disservice to Gandhi's system of education by saying that we need to have, that Gandhi said something very valuable about children knowing how to do productive work, and we need to train tribals, we need to train children from tribal areas in a way that they become equipped to be able to do jobs in industries, which was a complete antithesis of what Gandhi had proposed, because Gandhi's whole idea of productive work was to enable children to be able to do work with their own hands and form self-reliant and self-sufficient communities, and not on the path of industrialization. So this is the speech, and another, again starting from Nehru's idea of non-interference of non-tribals in purposes of administration in tribal areas, another related thing was to have teachers who are tribals themselves, and to come to a point where the children in tribal areas are being taught by teachers who come from local areas. But again, there was a report in 1990 by somebody called Ramamurthy, who was a Gandhian, who in a sense reviewed the 1986 national policy of education of the country, and highlighted that in 1990 only 6% of teachers in tribal areas were tribals themselves. And again, how languages, the tribal languages had found no space in school, etc. So I'm going to go quickly over to the next bit now. This is a picture from a school in Orissa, which is called the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, where about 25,000 tribal children are studying in a boarding school. And the school, when it's being funded by mining companies, and when the school started out, it had children who were scheduled castes as well as scheduled tribes, but systematically it's been made into a space which exclusively has tribal children. And Felix will talk much more in detail about the school. And I just want to juxtapose this with a picture of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School from 1878. And I mean, I don't think I need to say much about this, but it's very obvious what's happening and is happening.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think so.